Detective Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his badge as he walked through the precinct doors on Monday morning, coffee in one hand and his usual air of confidence surrounding him like cologne. At 38, he had earned his reputation as one of the toughest cops in the department. With 15 years on the force and a solve rate that made other detectives envious, Marcus believed he had seen it all and conquered most of it. The morning briefing room buzzed with the usual chatter until Captain Williams entered, followed by a woman Marcus had never seen before. She was tall, probably in her early 30s, with sharp brown eyes and an understated professional appearance that somehow commanded attention without trying. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun and she wore a simple gray suit that looked expensive but not flashy. "Listen up, everyone," Captain Williams announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "I want you all to meet Detective Sarah Chen. She's transferring to our precinct from downtown and will be working closely with several of you on ongoing cases." Marcus barely looked up from his case files. New transfers were common, and he had little patience for breaking in rookies or dealing with officers who couldn't handle the real work. He assumed she was probably some desk jockey looking for field experience or maybe someone's relative getting a favor. "Rodriguez," the captain called out, "I'm pairing you with Detective Chen on the Morrison case. Show her how we do things around here." Marcus finally glanced up, meeting Sarah's gaze briefly before turning back to his paperwork. "Sure thing, Cap. Hope she can keep up." Sarah said nothing, simply nodded politely and took a seat across the room. Marcus noticed she didn't seem nervous or eager to impress anyone, which was unusual for transfers. Most new officers were either overly enthusiastic or visibly intimidated by the precinct's reputation. Later that morning, as Marcus reviewed the Morrison case files, Sarah approached his desk. The case involved a series of break-ins in an upscale neighborhood, and Marcus had been working it for 3 weeks with little progress. "Ready to get started?" Sarah asked, her voice calm and professional. Marcus leaned back in his chair, sizing her up. "Look, Chen, I don't know what they taught you downtown, but this isn't some white-collar crime unit. These cases require real police work. Street smarts. You think you can handle that?" Sarah's expression remained neutral. "I think I can manage." "Good," Marcus said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Because I don't have time to babysit. We're going to canvass the neighborhood again, and I need someone who can actually talk to people, not just shuffle papers." As they walked to the patrol car, Marcus continued his informal orientation. "The thing about this job is knowing who's in charge. Chain of command matters. I've been working these streets since you were probably still in college, so when we're out there, you follow my lead. Got it?" Sarah simply nodded and got into the passenger seat. Marcus interpreted her silence as acceptance of his authority, which satisfied him. He liked working with people who understood the hierarchy. Their first stop was the Morrison residence, where the most recent break-in had occurred. Mrs. Morrison, a well-dressed woman in her 60s, met them at the door. Marcus had interviewed her twice before, but wanted to go over the details again with his new partner listening. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Chen. We're following up on a few more questions about the break-in." As Marcus began his usual line of questioning, Sarah remained quiet but observant. She noticed things Marcus had overlooked in previous visits: the angle of the security camera that had been mysteriously turned, the fact that nothing was taken from the easily accessible jewelry box on the dresser, and the precise way the lock had been picked. "Have you considered that this might be an inside job?" Sarah asked quietly as they walked back to the car. Marcus stopped and looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "An inside job? Lady, I've been doing this for 15 years. I think I know how to spot an inside job. These are random break-ins by opportunistic criminals." "The lockpicking was professional level," Sarah observed, "and whoever did this knew exactly where to look and what to avoid. They bypassed several valuable items that would be obvious to any random burglar." "Look, Chen," Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "I appreciate that you want to contribute, but theorizing isn't the same as police work. We deal in facts here, not hunches." Sarah didn't argue, but she made mental notes of everything she observed. As they drove to the next location, Marcus continued to lecture her about proper police procedure, the importance of following established protocols, and the difference between real detective work and academic theories. "The problem with officers today," Marcus said, "is they think they can just walk in and change everything. But there's a reason we do things the way we do them. Experience matters more than fresh ideas." At the second house, Marcus repeated his standard interview while Sarah quietly examined the crime scene. She noticed the same professional-level lockpicking, the same selective theft pattern, and the same careful avoidance of the home security system's main control panel. When they returned to the precinct that afternoon, Sarah excused herself to make some phone calls while Marcus updated his case notes. He felt satisfied with how the day had gone. His new partner seemed to understand her place and hadn't caused any problems. As the day ended, Marcus packed up his things and headed for the exit. He noticed Sarah was still at her desk making notes and working on something on her computer. Typical rookie behavior, he thought, trying to impress everyone by staying late. "Chen," he called out, "don't stay too late. We've got an early start tomorrow." Sarah looked up and smiled politely. "Thanks for the heads up. See you tomorrow, Marcus." As Marcus left the building, he felt confident about his new partnership. Sarah seemed competent enough, and more importantly, she appeared to respect his authority and experience. He had no idea that while he was giving her lectures about police hierarchy, Sarah was quietly building a completely different picture of both the case and the precinct itself. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah's transfer wasn't random, and her assignment to work with him wasn't coincidental. Her real purpose at the precinct was something that would soon turn his world completely upside down. Tuesday morning brought a new development in the Morrison case that Marcus was eager to pursue. A witness had called in claiming to have seen suspicious activity in the neighborhood the night before the latest break-in. Marcus was confident this would be the break they needed. "Chen," he called out as Sarah arrived at her desk, "grab your coat. We've got a witness to interview." Sarah gathered her things quickly and they headed out to meet Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down from the latest victim. Marcus had high hopes for this interview, feeling vindicated in his straightforward approach to police work. Mrs. Patterson welcomed them into her living room, offering coffee and cookies while she recounted what she had seen. "It was around 11 at night," she began. "I was letting my cat in when I noticed a man walking slowly past the Morrison house. He seemed to be looking at it very carefully." Marcus leaned forward, his notebook ready. "Can you describe this man?" "Well, he was average height, maybe wearing dark clothes. It was hard to see clearly because of the streetlight." As Mrs. Patterson continued her description, Marcus felt his excitement growing. This sounded like solid evidence of criminal surveillance. However, Sarah was asking different questions. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said gently, "did you notice if this person seemed familiar with the neighborhood? Was he walking like someone who belonged there, or did he seem lost?" "Oh, he definitely knew where he was going," Mrs. Patterson replied. "He walked right to that house like he'd been there before. And now that I think about it, he might have had keys because I didn't hear any breaking sounds." Marcus shot Sarah a look. Her questions were leading the witness in a direction he didn't appreciate. "Mrs. Patterson, let's focus on what you actually saw, not what you think might have happened." But Sarah continued her gentle probing. "Have you seen any service workers or maintenance people in the neighborhood recently? Maybe someone who would have legitimate access to multiple houses?" "Well, yes," Mrs. Patterson said, suddenly animated. "There's been a new handyman working on several houses. Very professional young man. He's been doing security system maintenance for at least 4 families on this street." Marcus felt his straightforward burglary case becoming complicated in ways he didn't like. "Mrs. Patterson, we're investigating break-ins, not maintenance work." Sarah, however, was taking detailed notes about the handyman. After they left Mrs. Patterson's house, Marcus confronted his partner in the car. "What was that about?" he demanded. "You're confusing witnesses with irrelevant questions. We had a clear description of a suspect, and you turned it into some theory about handymen." "The description could fit the handyman," Sarah pointed out calmly, "and it would explain how someone had easy access to multiple houses without forced entry." "Chen, you're overthinking this. Sometimes a burglary is just a burglary. Not everything is some complicated conspiracy." Sarah nodded but continued making notes. "Should we check with the security company about recent maintenance visits?" Marcus sighed heavily. "Fine, but we're wasting time that could be spent on real leads." Their visit to Secure Home Systems revealed that a technician named David Walsh had indeed been servicing homes in the affected neighborhood. The company provided his employment records and confirmed he had access to several of the burglarized houses. "This doesn't prove anything," Marcus insisted as they drove back to the precinct. "Lots of people have access to houses. That doesn't make them criminals." "But it's worth investigating," Sarah said. especially since the break-ins show professional knowledge of security systems. Back at the precinct, Sarah began running background checks on David Walsh while Marcus worked on his reports. He was growing increasingly frustrated with his partner's tendency to complicate what he saw as straightforward cases. "Rodriguez," Captain Williams called from his office. "Got a minute?" Marcus walked into the captain's office expecting to discuss the case progress. Instead, he found Captain Williams looking somewhat uncomfortable. "How are things going with Detective Chen?" the captain asked. "Fine," Marcus replied. "She's got some interesting ideas, but she needs to learn how we do things around here." "Nothing I can't handle." Captain Williams nodded slowly. "Good. Just wanted to make sure you two were working well together." "She comes highly recommended." "From downtown?" Marcus asked. "What kind of cases was she working there?" "Various assignments," the captain said vaguely. "Just keep me posted on how the partnership develops." Marcus left the captain's office feeling slightly puzzled by the conversation, but didn't think much of it. He returned to his desk to find Sarah on the phone with someone speaking in low tones. "I'll have a full report by Friday," she was saying. "Yes, I understand the timeline is important." When she hung up, Marcus looked at her curiously. "Work call?" "Just following up on some background information," Sarah replied smoothly. That afternoon, Sarah's research into David Walsh paid off. His background check revealed a previous arrest for burglary in another state, something that hadn't shown up in Secure Home Systems' initial screening. More importantly, his work schedule perfectly matched the timing of all the break-ins. "This is good work," Marcus admitted grudgingly when Sarah showed him the information. "But we still need solid evidence before we can make an arrest." "What if we set up surveillance on his next scheduled maintenance visit?" Sarah suggested. "According to his work orders, he's supposed to service the Hendricks house tomorrow evening." Marcus considered this. It was actually a solid plan, though he was reluctant to give Sarah too much credit. "All right. But we do this by the book. No cowboy stuff." That evening, as they prepared for the surveillance operation, Marcus found himself reassessing his partner. She was clearly more competent than he had initially assumed, though he still believed she needed his guidance and experience to be truly effective. "Chen," he said as they checked their equipment, "you did good work on this Walsh angle. Maybe you'll make a decent detective after all." Sarah smiled politely. "Thanks. I appreciate the feedback. Just remember," Marcus continued, "experience still matters more than book learning. I've been in situations you can't imagine. When things get rough out there, you follow my lead, understood?" "Understood," Sarah replied, though there was something in her tone that Marcus couldn't quite identify. As they settled into their surveillance position outside the Hendricks house, Marcus felt confident about the operation. He was back in his element, leading a stakeout based on solid detective work. What he didn't realize was that while he was focused on catching David Walsh, Sarah was quietly observing and documenting Marcus's methods, his attitudes, and his approach to both the case and their partnership. The surveillance was about to reveal more than just a burglary suspect. The surveillance operation on Wednesday evening proved to be exactly what Marcus needed to feel vindicated in his policing methods. Hidden in their unmarked car across from the Hendricks house, he and Sarah watched as David Walsh arrived in his Secure Home Systems van at exactly 7:30 p.m. "There's our guy," Marcus whispered, reaching for his radio. "Right on schedule, just like you predicted." Sarah nodded, keeping her binoculars trained on Walsh as he approached the front door with his toolkit. "He's using his key card to disable the alarm system first. That's standard protocol for maintenance. Or perfect cover for a burglary," Marcus added, his excitement building. "This is how real police work gets done, Chen. Good old-fashioned surveillance and patience." They watched Walsh enter the house and begin what appeared to be routine maintenance work. For 45 minutes, nothing seemed unusual. Walsh moved from room to room, checking various components of the security system with professional efficiency. "Maybe he's legitimate this time," Sarah suggested. "Or maybe he's casing the place for later," Marcus replied. "These guys are smart. They don't always hit every house they service." Then, at 8:15 p.m., Walsh's behavior changed. Instead of heading toward the front door, he moved to the master bedroom and began examining the dresser area where Mrs. Hendricks kept her jewelry box. He opened several drawers and appeared to be photographing their contents with his phone. "Got him," Marcus said triumphantly. "He's documenting valuables for a future hit. Time to move." As they approached the house, Marcus felt the familiar rush of a successful operation. This would be a clean arrest with solid evidence. Exactly the kind of police work that had built his reputation. They entered through the front door, which Walsh had left unlocked, and found him still in the master bedroom with his phone out, photographing the contents of Mrs. Hendricks's jewelry collection. "Police, freeze," Marcus commanded, his weapon drawn and badge visible. Walsh immediately dropped his phone and raised his hands, clearly startled and frightened. "Officers, I can explain. I'm here on a legitimate service call." "Sure you are," Marcus said, moving to secure the suspect. "That's why you're photographing jewelry instead of fixing security systems." As Marcus handcuffed Walsh, Sarah picked up the dropped phone and examined the photos. What she found made her pause. "Marcus," she said quietly, "these aren't surveillance photos. They're documentation photos for insurance purposes." Marcus stopped and looked at her with irritation. "What are you talking about?" Sarah showed him the phone screen. "Look at the metadata in the format. These are official insurance documentation photos. See the timestamp and the case number in the corner?" Walsh, still handcuffed but now speaking more confidently, addressed Sarah. "Thank you. Mrs. Hendricks hired our company to document her valuables for her insurance policy. She's been concerned about the break-ins in the neighborhood." Marcus felt his certainty beginning to crack. "But your background check showed a previous arrest for burglary." "That was 15 years ago when I was a teenager," Walsh explained. "I served my time, got my life together, and Secure Home hired me specifically because they believe in second chances. They do thorough background checks and provide rehabilitation opportunities." Sarah was already on her phone, calling Mrs. Hendricks to verify Walsh's story. Within minutes, she confirmed that Walsh was indeed there at Mrs. Hendricks's request to document her valuables for insurance purposes. "Mrs. Hendricks is actually at her sister's house," Sarah reported. "She arranged for Walsh to do the documentation while she was away because she felt safer not being present." Marcus uncuffed Walsh, his jaw tight with frustration and embarrassment. "Why didn't you just say so from the beginning?" "I tried to," Walsh replied, "but you seemed pretty convinced I was guilty of something." As they drove back to the precinct after apologizing to Walsh and ensuring Mrs. Hendricks was satisfied with the situation, Marcus was silent and clearly angry. "Look," Sarah said finally, "mistakes happen. The important thing is we followed proper procedure and corrected the situation when we had all the facts. I don't need you to make me feel better about this," Marcus snapped. "And I especially don't need you questioning my methods in front of suspects. That whole insurance documentation thing was just luck." "It wasn't luck," Sarah said quietly. "It was paying attention to details and not jumping to conclusions." Marcus pulled the car over and turned to face her, his face red with anger. "Listen, Chen, I don't know what kind of partnership you think this is, but let me make something clear. I'm the senior detective here. I've got 15 years of experience, and I don't need some rookie from downtown telling me how to read evidence." Sarah remained calm, which only made Marcus more frustrated. "I wasn't trying to undermine you. I was trying to make sure we had the right information before making an arrest." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You're second-guessing every decision I make, asking irrelevant questions, and now you're making me look incompetent in front of suspects. That wasn't my intention." "I don't care what your intention was," Marcus continued. "Here's how this is going to work from now on. When we're in the field, you follow my lead. When I make a decision, you support it. When I'm interviewing someone, you stay quiet unless I ask for your input. Got it?" Sarah studied his face for a long moment before responding. "I understand your position." "Good," Marcus said, pulling back into traffic. "Because I'm going to have a conversation with Captain Williams tomorrow about how partnerships are supposed to work in this precinct." The rest of the drive passed in tense silence. Marcus felt justified in establishing clear boundaries, while Sarah continued to observe and mentally document everything about his behavior and attitude. Back at the precinct, Marcus went straight to his desk to work on his reports, while Sarah made several phone calls from her desk. Marcus noticed she was speaking quietly and taking notes, but he was too focused on his frustration to pay much attention. As the evening shift ended, Marcus packed up his things with a sense of determination. Tomorrow he would have that conversation with Captain Williams and make sure his partnership with Sarah operated according to proper hierarchy and respect for experience. What Marcus didn't realize was that Sarah had spent the evening making her own calls to her real supervisors, providing detailed reports about his behavior, his decision-making process, and his attitude toward both suspects and fellow officers. The Walsh incident had revealed much more about Marcus Rodriguez than just his approach to police work, and Sarah's documentation was becoming more comprehensive by the day. Thursday morning arrived with Marcus feeling determined to reassert his authority. The Walsh incident had bruised his ego, but he was convinced that clearer boundaries with his partner would solve the problem. He arrived at the precinct early, planning to speak with Captain Williams before Sarah showed up. "Captain," Marcus said, knocking on Williams's office door. "Got a minute to discuss my partnership situation?" Captain Williams looked up from his paperwork with what seemed like resignation. "Come in, Rodriguez. Close the door." Marcus settled into the chair across from the captain's desk, ready to make his case. "Sir, I think Detective Chen needs some guidance about how partnerships work in this precinct. She's got good instincts, but she doesn't seem to understand chain of command or respect for experience." Captain Williams leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. "What exactly has she done that concerns you?" "Well, she questions my decisions in front of witnesses. She asks irrelevant questions during interviews, and yesterday she made me look incompetent in front of a suspect by second-guessing my read of the evidence." The Walsh situation? Marcus was surprised the captain already knew about it. "Yes, sir. She undermined my authority in a way that could have compromised the entire investigation." Captain Williams was quiet for a long moment, then opened a file on his desk. "Marcus, I need to tell you something about Detective Chen that I probably should have mentioned earlier." "Sir?" "Sarah Chen isn't a transfer from downtown patrol or even from regular detective work," Captain Williams said, his voice taking on a serious tone. "She's here on a special assignment." Marcus felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "What kind of special assignment?" "She's with Internal Affairs, Marcus. She's been assigned to conduct a comprehensive review of several officers in this precinct, including you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Internal Affairs? But she's been working cases with me, doing regular detective work. That's part of her assignment, to observe officers in their normal working environment and assess their methods, their attitudes, and their adherence to department policies." Marcus stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "How long has this been going on? How long have you known?" "Her assignment began 3 weeks ago. I've known from the beginning, but I was instructed not to inform the officers being reviewed." 3 weeks? Marcus's voice rose. "She's been documenting everything I've done for 3 weeks?" Captain Williams nodded gravely. "Marcus, I need you to understand that this isn't necessarily disciplinary. The department is conducting these reviews as part of a broader assessment of precinct operations and training needs." But Marcus wasn't listening to reassurances. His mind was replaying every interaction with Sarah, every comment he'd made, every decision she'd questioned. The casual way he dismissed her suggestions, his lectures about hierarchy, his insistence that she follow his lead without question. "This is unbelievable," Marcus said, beginning to pace. "She's been playing some kind of game, pretending to be a regular detective while actually spying on me." "She wasn't spying, Marcus. She was doing her job. Her job is to catch cops making mistakes, not to work actual cases." Captain Williams's voice became firmer. "Detective Chen is a highly qualified officer with extensive experience in both regular police work and internal investigations. She's been working real cases because that's the best way to assess how officers perform under normal circumstances." Marcus stopped pacing and stared at the captain. "What kind of extensive experience? I thought she was some rookie from downtown." "Detective Chen has been with the department for 8 years. She spent 5 years in major crimes before moving to Internal Affairs 3 years ago. She's led dozens of investigations and has commendations for both her detective work and her internal review assignments." The revelation hit Marcus like another physical blow. Not only had he been completely wrong about Sarah's experience and competence, but he had spent 3 weeks condescending to someone who actually outranked him in both experience and authority. Why wasn't I told about her real background? Because officers behave differently when they know they're being observed by Internal Affairs. The whole point was to see how you interact with partners and handle cases under normal circumstances. Marcus sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. "So everything I've said to her, every comment about experience and hierarchy, has been documented, yes." The full scope of his situation began to dawn on Marcus. Every patronizing comment, every dismissive attitude, every time he'd insisted she follow his lead, despite her clearly superior insights into the cases they were working. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. "Now you continue working with Detective Chen until her review is complete. But Marcus, I strongly suggest you adjust your approach." "How much trouble am I in?" Captain Williams hesitated. "That depends on how the rest of her review goes. But I will say that some of your recent interactions haven't reflected well on your professionalism or your ability to work collaboratively with fellow officers." Marcus left the captain's office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. As he walked back to his desk, he saw Sarah arriving for the day, looking as calm and professional as always. Now, however, he saw her completely differently. She wasn't the inexperienced transfer he'd been mentoring. She was an internal affairs detective with more specialized training than he had, carefully observing and documenting his every move. Worse, she had been gathering evidence of his arrogance, his dismissive attitude, and his inability to recognize competent police work when it came from a supposed subordinate. "Morning, Marcus," Sarah said as she settled at her desk, just as she had every morning for 3 weeks. "Morning," Marcus replied, his voice strained. As Sarah began reviewing case files, Marcus found himself studying her with new eyes. Her calm confidence wasn't rookie uncertainty. It was the assurance of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Her careful questions weren't inexperience. They were the methodical approach of a trained investigator, and her polite acceptance of his condescending lectures hadn't been respect for his authority. It had been professional patience while she documented his behavior for her official report. Marcus realized that every single interaction they'd had was probably recorded in detail somewhere, ready to be reviewed by internal affairs supervisors who would see exactly how he treated fellow officers and how his ego had blinded him to both good police work and basic professional respect. The irony was devastating. While he had been lecturing Sarah about police hierarchy and the importance of following experienced officers, she had actually been the superior officer, quietly doing her job while he made himself look worse with every passing day. Now he had to figure out how to salvage his career and his reputation while working alongside the person who held his professional future in her hands. The rest of Thursday passed in an uncomfortable haze for Marcus. Every interaction with Sarah felt loaded with new meaning. Every case discussion weighed down by his awareness of what she was really doing there. He found himself second-guessing everything he said and did, which only made his behavior more awkward and obvious. Sarah, meanwhile, continued working with the same professional demeanor she had maintained for 3 weeks. If she was aware that Marcus now knew her true identity, she gave no indication of it. She asked the same thoughtful questions, made the same insightful observations, and treated him with the same polite respect she always had. This only made Marcus feel worse. During their lunch break, Marcus couldn't stand the tension anymore. "Chen," he said quietly, "can we talk privately for a minute?" Sarah looked up from her sandwich. "Of course." They walked to a quiet corner of the precinct's break room, and Marcus struggled to find the right words. "I know who you are," he said finally. Sarah's expression didn't change. "I figured Captain Williams would need to tell you eventually. How long were you planning to keep pretending?" "I wasn't pretending anything," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm a police officer working cases and partnered with you. The fact that I'm also conducting a review doesn't change those basic facts." Marcus felt his frustration rising again. "Doesn't change the facts? You let me think you were some inexperienced transfer while I made a complete fool of myself for 3 weeks. You made assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of," Sarah said quietly. "I never told you I was inexperienced or that I was a rookie." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. She was right. He had assumed everything about her background based on nothing more than the fact that she was new to the precinct and didn't immediately challenge his authority. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we finish the cases we're working on and we continue to do our jobs," Sarah replied. "My review isn't complete yet. Are you going to recommend that I be disciplined?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "My job is to document what I observe and provide an objective assessment. What happens after that isn't up to me." Marcus spent the afternoon replaying every interaction they'd had, cringing at the memory of his condescending lectures and his dismissive attitude toward her insights. The Walsh incident looked even worse in retrospect. Not only had he made a poor tactical decision, but he had completely ignored his partner's superior analysis of the evidence. Friday brought a new case that would test everything Marcus thought he knew about police work and professional relationships. A domestic violence call came in from an upscale neighborhood, and Marcus and Sarah were assigned to respond. The victim was Jennifer Walsh, a successful attorney who had finally decided to report her husband's escalating abuse. As they sat in the Walsh living room, Marcus found himself in unfamiliar territory. For the first time since learning about Sarah's true identity, he genuinely didn't know how to handle the situation. Jennifer was articulate and professional, but she was also clearly traumatized and fearful. Her husband, according to her statement, was a prominent businessman who had been careful to leave no visible marks and who had threatened her career if she ever reported him. Marcus's usual approach to domestic violence cases was straightforward. Get the facts, document the evidence, make the arrest if there was probable cause. But as Jennifer told her story, he realized this case required a much more nuanced approach. Mrs. Walsh, Marcus began, we'll need you to provide a detailed statement about the incidents of abuse. Jennifer nodded but seemed hesitant. Will this be confidential? My husband has connections throughout the city, and he's made it clear that reporting him would be a mistake. Before Marcus could respond with his standard assurance about police procedure, Sarah spoke up. Mrs. Walsh, I understand your concerns about confidentiality and retaliation. Can you tell us more about the specific threats your husband has made regarding your career? As Jennifer described the systematic way her husband had isolated her from colleagues and threatened her professional reputation, Sarah asked careful questions that revealed the psychological aspects of the abuse that Marcus had missed. He's never hit me where anyone could see, Jennifer explained, but he's shown me articles about other attorneys who were disbarred for various reasons. He says he has friends who could make sure I never work in law again. Marcus was beginning to understand that this case involved more than simple assault charges. The psychological manipulation and economic threats were forms of abuse he hadn't been trained to recognize or address properly. Sarah continued her gentle but thorough questioning, helping Jennifer articulate the pattern of control and intimidation that had escalated over 2 years. She also identified several potential witnesses and sources of evidence that Marcus would never have thought to pursue. Mrs. Walsh, have you kept any records of these incidents? Text messages, emails, or notes about what happened? I have a journal, Jennifer admitted. I started writing things down because I was beginning to doubt my own memory of events. As the interview continued, Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by Sarah's skill and knowledge. She wasn't just following proper procedure, she was demonstrating a level of expertise in handling trauma cases that far exceeded his own. When they left the Walsh residence with a comprehensive statement and several leads to pursue, Marcus felt compelled to acknowledge what he had witnessed. That was really good work in there, he told Sarah as they drove back to the precinct. Thank you, Sarah replied simply. I wouldn't have known to ask half those questions or to look for that kind of evidence. Sarah glanced at him. Different cases require different approaches. Domestic violence cases especially require specialized training and experience. Marcus realized she was giving him an opportunity to learn something, rather than simply documenting his limitations. For the first time since learning about her real assignment, he decided to take advantage of it. What kind of training? He asked. I mean, obviously I need to improve my approach to these cases. Sarah seemed surprised by his question, but pleased by his willingness to learn. The department offers specialized domestic violence training, but there are also civilian programs that teach trauma-informed interviewing techniques. As they spent the rest of the afternoon following up on the Jennifer Walsh case, Marcus found himself in an entirely new dynamic with his partner. Instead of trying to prove his authority or defend his methods, he was genuinely learning from someone whose expertise exceeded his own. It was humbling, but it was also the first time in weeks that he felt like he was actually doing good police work. The following Monday marked the beginning of Marcus's 4th week working with Sarah, but everything had changed. Over the weekend, he had done something he rarely did. He had honestly examined his own behavior and admitted to himself that he had serious problems with his approach to police work and his treatment of fellow officers. The Jennifer Walsh domestic violence case had been successfully resolved on Friday when they arrested her husband at his office. Armed with not only Jennifer's detailed statement, but also corroborating evidence from two co-workers who had witnessed his controlling behavior and threatening phone calls. The arrest had gone smoothly because Sarah's thorough investigation had built an airtight case. Marcus arrived at the precinct that Monday with a decision. Instead of continuing to worry about his review or trying to minimize the damage to his reputation, he was going to use his remaining time with Sarah to actually learn from her expertise. "Sarah," he said as she settled at her desk, using her first name intentionally for the first time, "I owe you an apology." She looked up, clearly surprised by both his tone and his directness. "I've been a terrible partner," Marcus continued. "I made assumptions about your experience and abilities. I dismissed your insights and I treated you like some rookie who needed my guidance. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Sarah studied his face for a moment before responding. "Thank you for saying that. I know you're here to evaluate me, and I know my behavior over the past 3 weeks probably doesn't look good in your report. But I'd like to ask you for a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I'd like you to teach me," Marcus said simply. "Whatever time you have left on this assignment, I want to learn from you. Not because I'm trying to improve my review, but because I realize I need to become a better police officer." For the first time since he'd known her, Sarah smiled genuinely. "I'd be happy to do that." Their first real case as equal partners came that afternoon when they were assigned to investigate a series of fraudulent charity scams targeting elderly residents. Marcus's immediate instinct was to focus on the financial aspects and pursue the perpetrators through banking records and transaction histories. Sarah suggested a different approach. "What if we start by understanding how these scams work psychologically? If we know what techniques the scammers are using to gain victims' trust, we might be able to identify them more effectively." Instead of dismissing her suggestion or insisting on his own approach, Marcus genuinely considered it. "That makes sense. How do we do that?" Sarah spent the next hour explaining the psychological manipulation techniques used in elder fraud, the specific vulnerabilities that scammers exploit, and the importance of treating victims with dignity while gathering evidence. Marcus found himself taking notes and asking questions like a student. "The key thing to remember," Sarah explained, "is that the victims aren't stupid or naive. These scammers are sophisticated criminals who use proven psychological techniques to exploit natural human tendencies like trust and the desire to help others." When they interviewed their first victim, an 82-year-old retired teacher named Mr. Patterson, Marcus applied Sarah's guidance. Instead of focusing immediately on the financial details, he listened to Mr. Patterson's story with empathy and respect. "They were so convincing," Mr. Patterson explained. "The woman on the phone knew details about my grandson's college and his car. She said he was in jail and needed bail money, but that I shouldn't tell anyone because he was embarrassed." Sarah gently probed for more details about the phone calls, while Marcus documented the timeline and the specific information the scammers had used. Working together, they identified several key facts that previous investigators had missed. "Mr. Patterson," Sarah asked, "did the caller mention any specific names of police officers or lawyers involved in your grandson's case?" "Yes, she said Detective Williams was handling the case and that Attorney Johnson was representing my grandson." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. These names were too generic to be coincidental, and they suggested the scammers had a practiced script. Over the next several days, they interviewed 6 more victims and discovered that the scammers had used the same fake names and similar scripts in every case. More importantly, they had gathered enough psychological and technical details to identify the specific call center operation behind the scams. "This is excellent work," Captain Williams told them when they presented their findings. "You've not only solved these specific cases but identified a broader criminal operation that other jurisdictions can use to pursue additional charges." As they wrapped up the paperwork on Friday afternoon, Marcus reflected on how much his understanding of police work had evolved in just 1 week. Working with Sarah as an equal partner had been more productive and satisfying than any investigation he'd conducted in years. "Sarah," he said as they finished their reports, "can I ask you something about your review?" "Sure. How bad was it? I mean, how badly did I embarrass myself those first 3 weeks?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then answered honestly, "Your technical police skills are solid, Marcus. You know how to investigate cases and you care about getting results. But your approach to partnerships and your assumptions about other officers' abilities were problematic." Marcus nodded. What are you going to recommend? I'm going to recommend additional training in collaborative investigation techniques and partner dynamics. I'm also going to recommend that you be assigned to work with more experienced partners who can help you continue developing these skills. Not disciplinary action, not based on what I've observed this week, Sarah said. People can change their behavior when they're willing to acknowledge problems and work on them. You've shown that willingness. On Monday of the 5th week, Captain Williams called Marcus into his office again. Rodriguez, Detective Chen is finishing up her assignment here and will be transferring back to Internal Affairs headquarters next week. Marcus felt an unexpected sense of loss. Sir, she's been an excellent partner. I've learned more working with her than I have in years. Captain Williams smiled. That's exactly what she wrote in her final report. She's recommended you for the collaborative investigation training program and suggested you'd be an excellent candidate for the department's new Partner Mentor program. Partner Mentor program? We're starting a program where experienced officers work with newer detectives to help them develop collaborative skills and avoid the kind of partnership problems that have been identified in these reviews. Marcus realized what the captain was suggesting. You want me to help train other officers in partnership dynamics? Detective Chen thinks you'd be particularly effective because you've experienced both the problems and the solutions firsthand. As Marcus left the captain's office, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about his career development. The irony wasn't lost on him that the internal affairs investigation he had dreaded had actually become the most valuable professional development experience of his career. Sarah's assignment ended the following Friday with a brief goodbye at her desk. Thank you, Marcus told her simply. For what? For teaching me that being in charge isn't about having authority over other people. It's about taking responsibility for making everyone around you better at their job. Sarah shook his hand professionally, but there was warmth in her expression. You're going to be a great partner mentor, Marcus. You understand now what real leadership looks like. As Marcus watched Sarah Chen walk out of the precinct for the last time, he understood that she had given him something far more valuable than any disciplinary action could have taken away. She had shown him how to be the kind of police officer he had always thought he was, but had never actually been. The cop who thought he was in charge had learned what it really meant to lead.